Hey guys, today we are going to talk about how to get your first job in the UK as an expat. So this advice is for expats who are already in the UK on a visa, maybe the Youth Mobility Scheme visa, but don't yet have a job. So first up, I would recommend make getting a job your job. And I know this sounds really silly, but honestly it works. So for me as a Canadian, I came to the UK, I would wake up every morning, I set myself a routine, which as a side note, setting a routine is extremely helpful, not only to get over the jet lag and to help you feel a bit more settled, but I just find when you first move to the UK and everything is different, it can be really overwhelming. So side note, set yourself a routine. Now, my biggest piece of advice for getting that first job in the UK is to do this in a very systematic way. So every morning I'd wake up, I'd have my cup of coffee, I'd sit down at my computer. I picked about 5 or 6 job websites, and I will give you some examples in a minute. I picked these 6 websites. I would sit down every morning. Each website lets you use certain filters. So of course, location is a pretty big and important filter. But there's another one that you should also use, and that is to only show job postings posted in the last 24 hours. So every morning, I'd open up all of these websites, I'd filter for my location, and I would filter for the last 24 hours, and I would go through every single one of them. And then the next day, I'd do the exact same thing and repeat, day after day after day. So by doing it this way, you are seeing essentially every new job posting as soon as it is posted. You're not seeing the same postings over and over again and wasting your time. You get the most recent job openings across a variety of websites, and it gives you the best possible chance of finding the right one for you. Now, of course, before you can do this, you need to find websites. You need to find job websites. And honestly, it's pretty simple. Now, because I was going to be living in Kent, which is the southeast of England, I literally just Googled jobs in Kent, England. A whole bunch of job websites came up. I bookmarked about 5 or 6, and those were going to be the ones that I checked every day. So really big ones are websites like Reed. I'll put all the links in the description in case you want to check them out. Reed is a big one across the UK. Same with Indeed. We have Indeed in North America as well. That's a really big one. There's also one called Total Jobs, which was pretty good, so I would check that one. And then jobs in Kent, of course, that's very specific to my location, but if you are in a particular region in the UK, you may have something similar. And you want to repeat this process for yourself in whatever region of the UK you're going to be living in. Find your 5 to 6 job posting websites, filter them for the last 24 hours, do this every day, and it gives you the best possible chance to find the right job. Now, another question I get is, what should my resume look like? And honestly, this is a great question, and it is very difficult to verbally explain. But first off, in the UK, they call them CVs. So when you're looking at job postings, you're probably going to see it referred to as a CV rather than a resume. That's a very North American word. But here we call it a CV. Now, typically, I have found that employers here in the UK like CVs that are very straightforward, they're very concise, and they're very relevant. You can also Google, again, God bless Google. You can Google what a UK CV looks like to get some examples. But what I typically find to be helpful, at least to include on your CV, are things like your name, obviously, and contact information, including a mobile phone, and very importantly for you, your visa details. Now, if you are applying and it shows, your previous jobs were in Australia or in Canada, that's a red flag for an employer, so you need to make sure it is very clear on your CV that you are on a visa. What visa? Does that visa entitle you to work? Because if they think that you are in the UK illegally, or you're in the UK and you're not really supposed to be working, you are going to be immediately deleted. So just make sure at the top of your CV, it is very clearly stated that you are eligible to live and work in the UK. Next up, you want things like work experience. Schooling, I would only put if it's really relevant and it is recent. If you're, in your 30s, putting your high school is not really relevant. Only if there's space, I would include it. Otherwise, your actual work experience and your skills typically are more important. I would also include any volunteering that you have done recently or currently do, any professional development, or any like distance learning. Maybe you are taking courses part-time for something. That type of stuff is very interesting for employers, and it's something that I definitely would include as long as it is somewhat relevant and it is recent. If it's volunteering you've done like 10 years ago, I mean, it's a bit old. I also like to list like bullet point skills and knowledge. So like certain type of computer skills, or if you can use certain programs like Excel, or, you know, industry specific programs or software, all that kind of stuff. Just make sure that it's not too rambly and it is only the most relevant information. And ideally, make it as few pages as possible. If suddenly you have a CV that is 3 pages long, that's too long. Nobody's gonna read it. But when it comes down to it, just make it concise, straightforward, and relevant. Now, another important question I get is, when should I start applying for jobs? Now, when you receive approval for your visa, whether that is the Youth Mobility Scheme visa, whether that is a spouse or family visa, because you're going to join your significant other, your family, whatever, in the UK, whatever visa it is, it will give you a time frame or a window when they want you to enter the UK. So for me, on my first visa, the Youth Mobility Scheme visa, I knew that I was going to be entering the UK on November 21st. So what I decided to do was apply for jobs about a week before that. My thought process was, if you apply way too early and that employer is actually interested in you, they contact you, they want to see you for an interview, and you say, oh, actually, I'm not going to be in the UK for another month, you've just wasted a bunch of people's time. So I thought, by waiting to the final week, by the time people saw my application, by the time they contacted me for an interview, I would be in the UK or just about to arrive. So you don't want to do it too early and waste people's time, but there is something to be said about doing it just before you arrive. So I actually got 2 job interviews while I was still in Canada for the first week when I was going to be in England. Both were entry level. Both were like pretty basic, straightforward. I was feeling pretty confident. I was pretty excited. One of the jobs I'd actually already done in Canada and had since been promoted from that. So I thought, okay, this is great. We've got 2 job interviews already for my first week. I'm gonna get one of these. And then I was rejected for both. This section is simply called Be Prepared to Fail. Getting a job as an expat in the UK is tough. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that or pretend that it is easy, because it's not. It's really difficult to convince a British employer to take a chance on you, especially when you have an expiry date on your visa. Because if you look at it from their perspective, why would they hire someone that they can only have for, say, 2 years when they could hire a British person who could potentially be with them for 10 years? But I think if you go into this whole process knowing that it's going to be difficult, it kind of lessens the sting of the rejections that you are going to hear. It's not really you, it's not you. It's just the fact that you are an expat, and it's just something that's gonna happen. So if you expect it to happen, I think it hurts just a little bit less. But I'll be blunt, I remember crying on the train. I went to London for the day, and I remember coming home to Kent, crying on the train because I was rejected from one of the interviews, and the other company just never bothered to call me back. So it hurt. It was humbling. It knocked me down a couple of pegs, but I still ended up getting a job. So even though it is difficult, it's not impossible. If you are looking for any job, like any entry-level job, just know that it can be a bit difficult. If you are like a specialist and maybe you're looking for a particular field, perhaps that'll be easier for you because you have the qualifications in that field. Or on the flip side, it actually could be more difficult because there could be less jobs available. Job sectors that are always desperate for employees is also something to consider. The UK always needs teachers, always, or healthcare professionals. Almost always needs them. So if you are in those types of fields and you're interested in maybe coming to the UK, I definitely would recommend you looking into getting sponsored by an employer to do that job in the UK because they're almost always needed. Now, what's the best way to apply? Pretty much 99% is going to be online. I know, like, my dad was very much you need to go into the company, you need to shake their hand, you need to give them your resume. And I think we are pretty much past that. Every job I've ever applied for or been interested in or had an interview for, I applied for online. Now, there may be specific instances where you need to go in, perhaps, but I'm going to say that pretty much everything is going to be applied for online. Now, what about temporary work? Now, this is actually how I got my foot in the door to get my first job in the UK, and it's something that I always recommend expats look into. So what happened for me was every morning I'd sit down, I'd do my routine, I'd filter all those job websites for the last 24 hours, and I would apply, and I would apply, and I would apply, and I would apply. And just a side note, honestly, apply for so many more jobs than you would think. And one day I get a call. So what happened was a local college wanted a temporary admin position filled. Rather than do it themselves, because they just want someone temporary, they contacted a temporary recruitment agency. And basically it was like, find us someone to fill this position. The recruitment agency contacted me because I'd already worked in a school environment before doing admin. This is almost like the same position. They contacted me. I went in for a very brief interview, but it was pretty much just to offer me the job. So they told me that this position was going to be for 3 months. So I would be a temp agency worker at the college doing this admin position. After 3 months, they would reassess whether they still needed me or not. And to be completely honest, this went on for 12 months. So after a year of renewing this temp position with the agency, the college decided to buy me. So they hired me directly as a college employee. And then I worked for them for another year. The way I look at it is a lot of British people do not want to be a temporary worker. They don't want temporary positions. And that's where you come in. So even though it sucks, and it may be that they hire you for 3 months, and then it really is just 3 months, but there's a possibility that you could be retained for longer. And even still, at least you get those 3 months of British experience on your CV. So after my 2 years, one with the college as a temporary worker and one as an actual college employee, I then was able to get a more specialized job in the UK. And honestly, without that original experience, it would be next to impossible. So I always recommend to any expats, do not overlook temporary positions. It may be short term, it may end up being long term, you really won't know. But either way, you can get British experience on your CV. And honestly, that is the goal. Because once you have that, other employers are much more interested in giving you a try. So just keep in mind that getting a job in the UK as an expat is tough, but it's not impossible. Now, when getting a job, there are a couple of other steps that you need to be aware of. You are going to need a national insurance number, and you're also going to need a bank account. So make sure to check out my channel for videos on how to accomplish both of those things. But I wish you all the best in your job hunting, and I'll see you in the next one.